Hello everyone. Have you ever tried to tell a story, but once you got to the end, you realized that you left out an important part, but you couldn't quite figure out what it was? Well, I'm here to help. Today's the first in a 3-video series on how to write narratives. As you can see from this slide, we have quite a bit of information to cover, and that's why I broke it up into 3 different parts, so that you weren't too overwhelmed to start off with. So, what is a narrative, you might ask? Well, simply put, a narrative is a story or an account of events that can be either true or fictitious, which means made up or fictional. A narrative can be about anything that you want. It can be about a camping trip, a trip to Disneyland, the time that you faced your fears, or even the time that you got a puppy, as long as it contains all of the different parts that make up a narrative and make up a plot. So there are many different elements that go into a narrative to make it complete. And without all of these things, it's not a complete narrative and you won't get a full grade for it. So we're going to get into all of these in much more detail, but for now, I just want you to make a note of what they are. So the elements that are necessary for a narrative are exposition, rising action, climax, conflict, falling action, resolution, protagonist and antagonist, and then finally theme. And I like to compare the plot of a narrative to a roller coaster. So it slowly builds up, that start where you're going up the hill and it's like clicking, and you're getting anxious and you're getting excited, and it builds up to that most exciting part, which is that peak where you can see down to the other side, but you haven't quite made it over to fall yet. And then once you do fall, there's like a conclusion of some sort, and you're still excited, but it's very calming. So the plot of a narrative contains the main events. So it can be of a play, a novel, a movie, or similar work. We're going to be focusing on narratives, but it has to be in a specific order for it to be correct. So it's presented in a specific sequence by a writer, and in order for it to be correct, it has to follow a set order. So the order of that is extremely important, like I just said. So I want you to make a note of this, maybe put a star next to it or highlight it or something, just so that you remember it. The correct order is exposition, rising action, conflict, climax. You can switch those two around. Like I know I had it the opposite way on the last slide. Falling action, and then finally resolution. And like I mentioned, we will look at all of these in a lot more detail, and we're going to start with exposition. But like I mentioned, for the conflict and the climax, you can switch those around because a lot of times your conflict is your climax. But we'll get into that in a future video. So the exposition of a narrative is the general background information that includes the setting, which is where and when the story takes place. That can include like the name of the town, or if it's at a school, the name of the school. The characters, who they are, what their names are, how old they are, what their personality is like, and anything else about them that the reader would need to know in order to fully understand your story. And then there's historical context. So this may not be necessary for your narrative if it's set in modern times. You won't have to say in 2015 or 2016. But if you're deciding to set your story in like Victorian times or Shakespearean times, you may need to give a little bit of background information there so that the reader would fully understand it. So the historical context would include the time period and possibly a little bit more information about the setting, just so that the reader understands. And then anything else that the reader would need to know to fully understand your story would be included in your exposition. And then the last thing that we'll talk about today is the context. And this is the circumstances that form the setting of an event, statement, or idea so that it can be understood by the reader. So similar to the exposition, but a little bit more specific. So using my example from the exposition, if your story is set in Victorian times, it's important that all of the information that you are presenting is historically accurate. This means the style of the clothing, if you're describing their clothes, the way that the men and women interact, because it's much different than it is now. Men and women have a much more formal interactions. They're not so casual in how they talk to each other. Maybe the events that take place, they're not going to be hanging out at a park. They're going to be at a formal gathering of some sort. Um, and the language that they use, they're not going to be talking the way that we do and using the words like, and they have a much more formal speech, and a few of their words are even different than ours. So I want you to consider all of this before you begin writing it, before you begin writing your narrative. And this is stuff that you can use in your brainstorming when you're planning out what you're going to be writing about. So we're going to end there for today. This was a pretty quick video for you guys, but I did cover a lot of information. So if you need to go back and re-watch anything, feel free. But I am going to end it there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a good day.